To another edition of Public Leadership Institute's online training series. This particular session is going to be talking about political persuasion and best practices on how to engage the public with the goal of winning over a majority. Some housekeeping matters first. My name is Dave Woodward. I am the National Network Director with Public Leadership Institute, in addition to being a local county official and a former state legislator, and I'll be your host this afternoon as we embark on this topic. A little bit of background for those who are joining us for the first time. The Public Leadership Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank and leadership center focused on raising public awareness on important key issues as they relate to equity and justice, and working with public leaders who are striving to improve the economic and social conditions for all people. You get a lot of information about us, and a lot of the information we'll be talking about today is captured at our website at www.publicleadershipinstitute.org. There you'll find a host of resources, including our progressive agenda, our Voice and Our Values book in updated editions, including a Playbook for Abortion Rights, which is a special project Public Leadership Institute is working on, as well as a host of other additional resources. Be sure to also sign up for our email alerts to be invited to future webinars and receive our bulletins on important issues and topics as they relate to advancing progressive political policy change across America. A little bit of housekeeping here as well. I just want to make certain that everyone who is joining us, that we maximize your participation. There are a number of ways that we want to bring your thoughts, comments, feedback into the discussion today. To that end, there's a variety of ways to do that. If you have audio capabilities where you're joining us, you can click on the hand icon on your control panel at any time. And we'll pause for questions to our presenter, and he will we'll be able to answer all those questions as they come in, and we bring you live if you have that audio availability from where you're joining us. I do realize that people join us from a variety of ways, and just for future reference, you can join us on your smartphones, tablets, laptops, and other data source devices, and so even if you're not at your desk or laptop, you can join us from a variety of other technology tools as well. And sometimes in those circumstances, it's easier to type questions in the question bar. Please do that. We'll try to get through as many of those questions as time allows. And lastly, my email, dwoodward@publicleadershipinstitute.org, is there on the screen. Feel free to email me if you have any questions after the webinar. We'll make certain that we get those questions answered to support your work and how hopefully you're putting the information that we're discussing today into practice. This I like to talk about is an ongoing conversation about how to do this in this particular topic, political persuasion, do it more effectively to achieve the long-term goals that we're working for. Without any further ado, I want to introduce the communication champions hero to the stars, our very own Bernie Horn, who is the Senior Director for Policy and Communications with Public Leadership Institute. In addition to that, he's been a long-term communications trainer, policy director, author, lawyer, political consultant. He's virtually done it all. We're very fortunate to have him with us today to lead us through the topic, as we talked about, political persuasion 101, putting these best practices to winning the argument. So without any further ado, Bernie, thank you very much. Thank you for being with us, and I'll hand control over to you.
Thank you, Dave. I'm looking for the little button.
Oh, you should have it. Did it get over to you? Oh, there you go.
Ah, okay.
Sorry, that's
yep.
Had to do it a couple times here. Okay.
Yep. Okay. There we are. So, Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Dave. We're going to talk about voicing our values. This is our flagship messaging tool that we offer to policymakers and advocates, and we have a lot of other tools as well. I want you to be aware that you can go to publicleadershipinstitute.org and have access to the Progressive Agenda, which gives about 200 ideas for state and local legislation on a wide variety of topics. The Voicing Our Values messaging, we have a new book that is going to be published on July 7th, and what I'm going to be talking about is, from that new book. You'll be able to access it on our website in about 2 weeks. We also have a new book called Preparing to Win, which is a guide to advocacy, how to run a great advocacy campaign. That's also being published on July 7th, and it will also be on our website in about 2 weeks. And we have the Playbook for abortion rights, which is on our website, and that's a special project that we do. So, politics is the art of persuasion. That's what we do. But the right-wing media machine and their alternative facts make persuasion pretty hard. So first, let's explore the problem. Why are people so willing to believe false facts and fallacious arguments? For most of the 20th century, political science and economics and philosophy was based upon the idea that people made their decisions based upon logic and facts. But in the last few decades, there have been thousands of academic studies that show that people actually rely on emotion and ingrained beliefs far more than they employ objective facts or logic. This is one of the books that explains that. Daniel Kahneman is a Nobel Prize winner, and he describes dozens of ways that cognitive biases skew human reasoning. But there's one particular cognitive bias that's important to understand in politics, and that's what I want to explain to you or talk about. It's confirmation bias. This is when people seek out information that conforms to what they already believe or want to believe, while inside their minds they ignore or refute information that disproves those assumptions. It's a selective use of evidence in which people reinforce to themselves what they want to believe. It's a kind of self-delusion. Confirmation bias is one of the oldest known and best proven cognitive biases. This picture is there because Sir Francis Bacon explained it 400 years ago. And today, it's accepted science. So if a person believes that violent crime keeps increasing, he or she will retain information about recent crimes, and based on reports on Fox and Rush Limbaugh and other right-wing sources, they will accumulate a series of facts in their heads in order to believe what they want to believe and disbelieve or ignore the fact that crime rates have been dropping dramatically, since the early to mid 1990s, dramatically. In short, when faced with facts that contradict strongly felt beliefs, people will almost always reject the facts and hold on to their beliefs. That's confirmation bias. So, if you present evidence or use language that seems to challenge your listeners' key beliefs, they're going to stop listening. And this is a real challenge. So, especially if they think you're saying, you are wrong. They hear or feel that you're saying you are wrong. It basically clicks a switch in their brains and turns off rational consideration of what you're saying and clicks on negative emotions. Now, why do people's brains work that way? Well, psychologists widely use labels System 1 and System 2 to describe two main memory systems. System 1 is the fast system that reacts instantaneously, reflexively, emotionally. It's an automatic, intuitive, and subconscious system. System 2 is the slow system that we're more familiar with. You know, it's deliberate, controls abstract thinking, stores memories, such as facts and events. Because System 1 operates in milliseconds, it's very fast. Its reactions can override or redirect System 2's slower reasoning. So if your listener's reflexive system determines that you're attacking his or her important beliefs, it'll divert thinking away from the rational mechanisms in the brain to the emotional ones. It's essentially a use of the fight or flight instinct, but it applies to argument, to talk, to debate. You know, let's imagine you're discussing politics with your crotchety old uncle, and you say, you know, voter fraud is virtually non-existent, which is obviously true. His brain's going to perceive your words as an attack. And so he's going to feel strongly negative emotion in his head and will remember the things that are very real to him because he saw them on Fox that support his belief in voter fraud. And you will have failed to persuade him of anything. I mean, the debate is over. You know, as political scientists, as political activists, as politicians or advocates, we wish that we could reason with people and have calm, cool, dispassionate discussions about public policy. But instead, what we tend to do is we trigger in our listeners a negative emotional response. And then the discussion is, for all intents and purposes, over. Clinical psychologist Drew Weston wrote this book and used a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, fMRI, to examine what was going on in the brains of partisans during the 2004 election. So he gave the test subjects a series of openly contradictory statements from George W. Bush on the one hand and John Kerry on the other hand. And based on confirmation bias, he certainly expected that each partisan in, you know, being examined in the fMRI would overlook the contradictions of his or her own candidate while indignantly protesting the contradictions of the other guy. And just as Weston expected, just as Sir Francis Bacon would have expected, the test subjects did just that. Then Weston looks at the fMRIs, and the subjects, again, not too surprisingly, had not engaged the logical parts of their brains. They had engaged the emotional parts. So that was kind of expected. But then he found that when people rationalized away the legitimate attacks on their own favored candidates, the brain's pleasure center released the neurotransmitter dopamine. And so when they pushed back and when they, you know, falsely defended their own candidate, they felt good. They, you know, actually felt good. And that this means that when you attack pre-existing beliefs, you're not only are your arguments rejected, but you're helping to emotionally reward the partisans for their stubbornness, and it deepens their attachment to false ideas. So, you know, I think that the leaders of the right wing understand confirmation bias. They know that conservative voters are not searching for the truth. They're searching for facts that support their pre-existing beliefs. And so they put it all on Fox or Rush Limbaugh or Breitbart That's why conservatives are so susceptible to fake news, because it's just there to confirm what they already believe. They're totally willing and ready to believe it. So, in sum, there's tremendous barriers in the path of persuasion. How do we work around that? Well, those avid partisans are invested in their pre-existing beliefs, and they're just very, very difficult to push. But among persuadable voters, confirmation bias can be overcome. These are the swing voters that could go one way or the other. It's not that they lack political beliefs or biases or stereotypes. Rather, they carry in their minds both red and blue ideas, as in this little chart here. We call them purple not because they're moderate, but because they can be pulled to one side or the other by both conservative ideas and by progressive ideas, depending on how the question is framed to them. But the advantage here is that their intensity is far, far, far lower than people who are in either base. So they're much more willing to give up some part of what they already believe. They're much more willing to, they don't have to defend it with the fervor that people in the base have to defend it. And so these are the people that we can persuade. So what are the rules to persuade them? I'm going to give you 3 rules, and they apply to any issue at all. The first rule it's a very old rule of persuasion. 80 years ago, Dale Carnegie explained it in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And, here it is. Talking to people, don't begin by discussing the things on which you differ. Begin by emphasizing and keep on emphasizing the things on which you agree. Keep emphasizing, if possible, that you're both striving for the same end and that your only difference is one of method and not of purpose. If you can show somebody that you're on the same side as in terms of your goals or ideals, then you have the chance to pull them over to your side. You're with them. Your ideas, your goals, your purposes are the same. And then you can show them how our progressive policy gets them there. So what you want to do is to start every argument from a point of agreement and give your audience a bridge from their preconceptions to your solutions. By the way, I should say, Dale Carnegie didn't invent this either. This has been an idea of rhetoric for thousands of years, and one of the people that explained how it works so well in politics was Abraham Lincoln. This is just commonly discussed for all of the history of politics. We just need to apply it. In order to make our progressive argument, we have to get past the system 1 that reacts emotionally and get to the system 2 that is willing to think about our argument. Now, this isn't so difficult. There's a whole lot of issues where all you have to do is to state a fairly universally accepted problem. Prescription drugs cost too much. If you start that way, you're starting an agreement. Or you emphasize your listeners' concerns. You're right to be worried about the environmental impact of that new bridge down the road. Or state a policy ideal. Every child in our city should have access to world-class public schools. If you start in any one of those 3 ways, by agreeing with the problem, or empathizing, or by stating a policy ideal, you're starting in agreement. Now, here's a few more specific thoughts. Let's say you're walking down the street, going door to door, talking to voters, and somebody says, they complain about taxes, even in a conservative fashion. you can always start by saying our tax system is unfair. You know, your idea of why it's unfair and their idea may be different, but you know, we believe that the tax system gives unreasonable advantages to the rich and unreasonable tax breaks, and it does. And incidentally, they think so too. So when you talk about taxes, you can just start that way, and you're in agreement. Or in budgets, which is very similar, you know, you don't have to sound conservative by simply saying that we have to be careful with taxpayer money. We do want to be careful. We want to use taxpayer money efficiently and effectively. We don't want to waste it. So just make it clear, and you'll be in agreement. Or if you're talking about crime, you know, public safety is the top priority for government, or a top priority. It's clearly that is true. Clearly we want public safety. Just put it out there and you're in agreement. Or let's say someone's complaining about their neighborhood, you're going door to door and they say, you know, the neighborhood's going downhill. And you're looking around saying, gee, it sure doesn't look like it. But just agree with them by saying, hey, we need to preserve the quality of life in our neighborhoods. You're not doing anything harmful. You are saying something truthful, but you're reaching out for some place where you can agree. And, you know, the bottom line is that political persuasion is really not about changing people's minds, because, tell you the truth, you can't really do that. It's about making them understand that they agree with you already, that you agree with them already, that you're on the same side. That is political persuasion, is show them that your solution is consistent with their ideals, with what's in their mind already. And if you do it right, you can show that. We are on their side. The second rule is to use progressive values. Values are words that have meanings, positive meanings, built inside of them. So here's some words that describe values that describe a person, a good person. And each one of these words describes a behavior, but inside the word, it says, and this behavior is good. And the interesting thing is that these behaviors are not necessarily good. Calling someone thrifty, the same behavior could be called penny pinching, or calling someone brave, the same behavior could be called foolish. It's the word itself that has inside of it the assumption that it's good. That's values. So in public policy, values are the same. Inside them, they're saying that this is good. These are just some values in public debate where, when you say them, people are in agreement with you, because the way our language is structured, these all imply that they're good, and everyone is going to agree that they are good. But in addition, they stand for something that we really believe in. So it's a double whammy. It's both a language device and a description of our goals, our ideals. And that's what, that's one of the ways to stay in agreement, is to show people that your ideals, your political ideals and goals, are the same as theirs. And when you are for these kinds of values, that's what you're saying. A stereotypical conservative, people might think that they're for small government and low taxes and free markets and strong military and traditional families. And those words do a pretty good job of laying out a popular philosophy, even though they don't actually do those things, but they say them, and it is popular. And our side has a very hard time giving an effective response. Usually progressives want to give a laundry list of policies in response. That's not effective with these persuadable voters. And there is another way, and I'm going to talk about how you can use values to respond successfully to these conservative values. So there are three situations for any policy. They fit into one of these three situations. And I want you to imagine a balanced scale. That's a scale like the kind that the representative of justice is holding blindfolded. You know, it's a bar with weights on either end. And in a progressive world, the role of government is to balance the scale when powerful individuals or organizations compete against weaker ones. That's the purpose of government. Government is a counterweight on the scale of justice. The greater the disparity of power between competing interests, the greater weight that the government should provide to the weaker side. Balance is justice. A system in balance rewards hard work, efficiency, and innovation, and discourages crime, corruption, and gaming the system. So, first, where a government has no proper role because public action would violate our individual rights, our fundamental human rights, the progressive policy is based on freedom. Freedom means the absence of legal interference with our fundamental rights: freedom of speech, religion, association, right to privacy, the right to the accused. Compared to an individual, government wields tremendous, enormous power. So progressive policy has to add great weight in the form of strong legal rights to the individual side of the scale, so that freedom of speech, for example, should not be abridged except for, as Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes put it, falsely shouting fire in a theater. Government should not be involved. Freedom should be a fairly simple concept, but progressives rarely say it at all. We rarely say it, even though, truth be told, this is the most powerful value in American politics. Americans believe in freedom more than they believe in anything else. That is why the conservatives say it all the time. We never say it, even when it's applicable. And if you can't cry freedom, you can't explain why you're progressive. The second situation is where government acts as a referee between private unequal interests. The progressive policy is based on opportunity. Opportunity means level playing field in social and economic affairs, fair dealings between the powerful and the less powerful. The elimination of discrimination, education for all. These are things that progressives, feel. We really believe them. And it's not so hard to get progressives to talk about opportunity or equal opportunity. We just need to make it clear that it's not just that we're for opportunity for individuals against huge corporations. We're also for equal opportunity between small businesses and large businesses, between shareholders and the management of companies. We don't want to be painted into a corner, and we do believe in those things. The third and last situation is where government acts to protect those who can't reasonably protect themselves, including future generations. Progressive policy is based on security. Security includes, of course, protecting Americans from criminals and foreign terrorists, of course, but it also means ensuring the sick and the vulnerable, safeguarding the food we eat and products we use, and preserving the environment. There's always a threat that some larger or unexpected force is going to attack any one of us, so progressive policy adds weight in the form of government institutions and programs that protect us from harm. So, for example, society has responsibility to protect the elderly, the disabled, widows, and orphans, and that's why an aptly named program has functioned for more than 80 years called Social Security. It's a great value. We don't talk about it enough. Now, I'd like you to think about whether these words sound kind of familiar, or at least the concepts. They sound kind of familiar. And that's because all of us, every single one of us, virtually anybody who's a voter at least, knows something that's similar from our history. And Thomas Jefferson wrote it. It was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When he wrote life, he did not mean that it's okay to be beaten half to death. Life meant for him security. And when he said liberty, he meant the same thing we mean by freedom today. And when he wrote the pursuit of happiness, sometimes you scratch your head and say, what does he mean? But if you look at it in context, he's really talking about opportunity. He really was talking about freedom, opportunity, and security in the Declaration of Independence, which everyone recognizes is, the American philosophy. So, what do progressives stand for, really? Really? The difference between progressives and conservatives today, really, is that we stand for freedom, opportunity, and security for all citizens, all residents. We're for all. They're for freedom, opportunity, and security, sure, but only for some. That is the real, honest-to-goodness difference between us. If you are debating somebody, even a far right-winger, and you say, you're for freedom, opportunity, and security for all, they're going to have an awful hard time debating you on that. I mean, they're going to be dumbfounded. I've used that on right-wing talk radio, and they're dumbfounded because they're not ready for that. They don't know how to answer that. And it's the most truthful thing you can say. Now, of course, you can't say freedom, opportunity, and security all the time in every sentence when you're talking about policy. But fortunately, there are lots of words that mean the same thing as freedom, opportunity, and security. You'll find this chart in Voicing Our Values, which is on our website, and which you can download or you can buy the book online, especially if you wait just a couple of weeks and buy the 3rd edition instead of the 2nd edition. It'll give you all the latest stuff. But when you have an issue where government should not get involved, these are the kinds of values to talk about. And people will be in agreement because you're using words that they agree with. They understand these goals to be good goals, to be the right goals. And those are our goals. I'll just give you a few examples here. You're talking about hate and prejudice and so forth, which is unusually common nowadays. You could start by saying something about, what makes America special is its commitment to freedom and justice for all. That puts you in agreement, and it anchors you to universally accepted values, and it makes it difficult for the other side. Or you're talking about wages or something having to do with the workplace. America should be a land of opportunity where hard work is rewarded. Again, it uses values. It's in agreement. It's purely American, and it supports our progressive policy. Or you're talking about crime. Our progressive policy is the one that lowers recidivism, which makes all of us safer. I mean, that is what our criminal justice policy is designed to do, is to make us all safer, and it does. The third rule is that we want to focus on how our listeners benefit. Now, progressives, people in the progressive base, we wish that a majority of Americans were persuaded, as we are, by appeals to the public good. What is good for society, what's good for all of us. Certainly that was what Hillary Clinton was saying during her campaign, essentially. But they're not persuaded that way. No, in fact, it's quite difficult to convince an average citizen to support a policy that appears to benefit someone other than themselves. People who are persuadable, and most Americans actually, are quite individualistic. When they're faced with a policy or a political choice, they're thinking, how is this going to help me? How is this going to hurt me? And that's it. Me, my family, my immediate friends, my community, but it's really quite, it's about me. And that means that whenever possible, you need to show voters that they personally benefit from your progressive policies. Now, usually that's not so hard. You know, when you're talking about climate change, you can emphasize how it affects your listeners' children and grandchildren. Obviously, it affects them directly. You know, sometimes it's more of a challenge. You know, if you're arguing for programs that benefit people in poverty, you generally are going to do better not by focusing on the way that your proposal directly helps the poor, but instead in the way that it indirectly benefits the middle class, because the persuadables are middle class people. People in poverty generally aren't among the persuadables. So, you know, first of all, you don't want to say them or people in poverty, or, you know, talk about it as if you and the listener are separate from the beneficiary. You want to talk about you and us and our families and our communities and our friends and our neighbors are going to be the beneficiaries. Here's some examples. Okay, so the minimum wage. When you're talking about the minimum wage, most of your listeners don't make the minimum wage, and they don't necessarily know anybody that makes minimum wage, and they feel a little separated from it. But it's easy to show that the minimum wage stimulates the economy, which is good for everyone. They believe that. I mean, if you just say that, they believe it. This is a little bit more specific, that it generates business for the local economy and eases the burden on taxpayer-funded services. See, it's just not that hard to take something that directly benefits people who are essentially in poverty or near poverty, and instead you're focusing on something that your listener really wants to know. Or education. Instead of talking about schools nationwide or schools on the other side of the city or whatever, you know, in education, people want to know how it affects their children and their grandchildren, their nieces and nephews and their neighbors' children, the children that they know. That's what they want to know. So, you know, we need public schools for our families and communities that provide each and every child the opportunity to reach their fullest potential in life. I mean, that's what you're trying to get across. And progressive policy does that. Progressive policy accomplishes this, and that's what they want to know. So it comes down to this. All of political persuasion is really whether one person or one side, you know, is on your side. This policy is on your side, this policy is not on your side. This candidate's on your side, this candidate's not on your side. That's it. Especially these persuadable voters are the least knowledgeable and the least engaged in politics. So they're really looking for something very simple. You know, when you tell them that you share their ideals and goals and that you empathize with them, even if they don't like your policy solution, they may very well go with you just because they feel like you understand them, you're on their side, even if they don't even agree with or understand the specifics of the policy. Worked for Donald Trump. That's all he put across to the non-college educated white voters, is he was on their side. So I'm going to take questions on this, and then there'll be a separate section about economics, about why we're in this situation with the non-college educated white voters and what we can do about it.
So if you have any questions about anything that Bernie has talked about, click on the hand icon if you have audio capabilities, or type questions in the question bar. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, Bernie, I have a question, and we talk about a lot of this, these strategies and techniques as best practices to do this. Can you speak a little bit more to the research that helps inform this, and the stuff that you're talking about, as well as like the messaging tool that's fully encapsulated in the Voice in Our Values publication, including the new edition that's coming forward?
That's a good point. This isn't just made up. This is consistent with a great deal of research, but the freedom, opportunity, and security portion was polled by Celinda Lake, who is one of our nation's really best political pollsters, and found that it really worked great. And it was one of the few things that could defeat the conservative values head to head. And there has been a great deal more polling from progressive pollsters that has confirmed these rules.
Great. And I guess I also related to that, and you pointed to the fact that despite having this research done, despite having a framework like this, we don't seem to have enough progressive champions putting it into practice to the full extent that it could be. And could you maybe speak to what do you think some reasons for that? We certainly have some champions that are doing this and doing this really well, but I mean, I think just using freedom, the most powerful value-laced American identity word, not being incorporated into progressive dialogue and reason to champion the ideas and issues and policy solutions that we're calling for. Why do you think that is?
Well, we have a tradition of being rational. We have a tradition of trying to convince people based upon facts and policies, and our candidates have tended to run on a platform thinking that that's how people decide who to vote for. And that may be true in some primary elections where the base is, really does have a laundry list of issues that they want to check off. Oh, this person is pro-choice and this person's going to do something about global warming and so forth. But the persuadable voters don't act that way, and Democrats and progressives have a long history of just appealing to them the wrong way. Now, there's plenty of people who do it well. For example, Senator John Tester of Montana does not have a problem talking about freedom, and it works great. Obviously, it works great with his constituents, but what he says would work great anywhere.
Right. We got a couple questions that have come through. We have our first question here from Margot that talks like a lot of these values, and I mean, in the case like values and quotation marks, seem to appeal deeply to those white voters we were discussing, particularly this working class white voter that in large degree broke for President Trump last election. But in order to persuade a more intersectional group of the voting population, how would you alter those value statements to meet people of color where they are?
Well, according to polling, this does meet them where they are. Now, everybody may have different ideas in their mind when they hear these words, but they are positive ideas. So people in our base are just as much in favor of freedom, opportunity, and security as people who are non-college educated white voters, but they may assign slightly different policies to those ideals. But according to polling, it works with our base. It energizes our base. What our base really wants to know is, again, the laundry list. So it's not so much how we talk, but what we stand for. And we're not suggesting that anybody moderate their policies. My goodness, we're progressive. We want people to go all out for progressive policy, and that's what's going to appeal to the base. This language is going to appeal to the people who are persuadable.
Right. And so, I guess let me state another way that this language doesn't alienate our base, particularly communities of color. Frankly, can be a way to illustrate what those solutions are and how they individually benefit. But again, speaking of our base and people of color being a good portion of that base, wanting to be very clear where a candidate or a political leader, what those solutions actually do, and care more about, I guess you would say, the substance and outcome than the, I guess, the prose and the communication of those ideas.
Yeah, I think that while Barack Obama didn't exactly say these words, it's awfully similar to the way he spoke. And he didn't have any problem interesting our base.
Right. Another question here from Stephen. Do we need to be careful about our use of the word progressive? I mean, some people hear the words liberal and progressive and immediately turn out. So can you maybe speak, I got like the word progressive, or maybe even speak to the word liberal as well, like those labels, and what's the, I mean, especially to a persuadable audience, which I think it's really important that we realize that we're talking about a group of people, a relatively small percentage of the overall population. How do these type of political labels impact them?
This is addressed on our website. There's a little poll that asks that very question. Progressive is the most popular label for in politics. It's more popular than conservative. Conservative, unfortunately, is quite a bit more popular than liberal. So progressive works a lot better than liberal, and I would not hesitate to say progressive to anybody. The persuadables do not have a problem with progressive. In fact, I'd take the opportunity to explain what a progressive is for, but it's a great label.
Great. All right, why don't we move on to the economic conversation that you were teasing out? And if people have additional questions, feel free to type question in the question bar or raise your hand in the future.
Excellent. We believe that for the foreseeable future, the most powerful contrast between progressives and conservatives is going to be about economic fairness, and progressives side with the middle class while conservatives side with the rich. But Donald Trump turned this on his head, convincing non-college educated white voters that the conservatives side with the middle class while progressives side with essentially people of color. We have to take back that economic narrative. We just have to. We're going to lose if we don't take back this narrative. Now, President John F. Kennedy repeatedly used the phrase, "a rising tide lifts all boats." And what that came to mean over time is that a stronger economy benefits all Americans. At the time, Kennedy was correct. This chart here is from EPI, and you'll see that from the post-war period through sometime in the 1970s, as productivity increased, average compensation to workers increased at almost exactly the same rate. And what that means is that as the economy created wealth, it was shared fairly equally among everyone. But starting in the 70s and really accelerating quite a bit in the middle of the Reagan administration and has continued since, productivity has continued to go up at about the same rate as it did all along, while average hourly compensation has just about flatlined. I mean, it is hardly greater than it was in the 70s. And what that means is that as the economy created wealth, it all went to the rich. It did not go to the rest of us. We created it, and we didn't get the money. And that's what really happened. Here's another way of looking at that. This is a chart about assets rather than income. And this is from the Congressional Budget Office. So you can't find a more objective and non-ideological source than this. Since the end of the Reagan administration, the richest 10% of Americans doubled their wealth, while the bottom 90% gained only slightly. The bottom half, in terms of assets, started with less than 1%, ended with less than 1%. They gained nothing. They gained nothing. So as the economy generated wealth, again, here's a different indicator that the rich took the money. They just took it. Now, in addition to this, you can find other sites that show that the richest 1% of Americans own more private wealth than the bottom 95% combined. The 20 richest Americans own more assets than the entire bottom half of the U.S. population. And there are just 8 people, 6 of them Americans: Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Ellison, and Mike Bloomberg. That's 6 of the 8 who own as much wealth as half of the world's population. That is, those 8 people own as much as 3.6 billion people combined. So look, the conservatives like to say that, it's just the normal functioning of the market that gave this wealth to people, but that's just not true. It's a redirection of wealth to the wealthy, consciously accomplished in many, many ways, large and small. Management pay was exponentially increased, workers' benefits were minimized, government regulations were amended or abolished to benefit the wealthy, unions were destroyed, corporations sent factory jobs overseas, businesses cut costs by minimizing customer service or making customers do the work. You all know what's happened in this country. That's the story that is true. And it's essential to understand that because, that's what's behind both the Trump vote and the Sanders vote in 2016. People don't know these charts. They don't know anything about these charts. They would be completely dumbfounded by looking at these charts. They wouldn't understand them anyway. But average Americans, they understand that they've been treated unfairly. They understand that their families are worse off than they were decades ago. And they understand that somebody is to blame for it. Somebody is to blame for it. And in that, they are right. However, when they're looking for someone to blame, Donald Trump comes along and tells people that they should blame people of color. Right? He very vocally attacked Latinos and Muslims, and more subtly attacked African Americans and anyone else who, didn't appear to be white. And Trump, while Trump said this in the very grossest of ways for a year and a half, he was just expressing what the right-wing narrative of grievance has been for some time now, especially during the presidency of Barack Obama. I mean, he was just saying what's been said. He just said it with no subtlety whatsoever. So, what leaders of the right have been doing all these years is encourage the less educated white voters to make their political decisions not based on policies that would benefit them, but through a filter of their social identity. Now, social identity is, standard psychology. It tells us that a great deal of a person's self-image comes from their social identity, the group or groups that they see themselves as a part of. They divide the world into us versus them. And the us can be something as unimportant as, what football team you support, or it can be about an individual's social class or their family or their college or their country. Being part of a group makes people feel good inside, and it enhances their pride and self-esteem. And there is nothing wrong with that usually. But people also enhance their self-esteem by denigrating the other side, the them. Like the same thing as the subjects in the Drew Weston experiments where they actually get that rush of dopamine. People who express their prejudice or they discriminate against the out group, they're physically feeling good as a result. It makes them feel good to be against the them. And I think you gotta admit that Donald Trump is certainly one of them, right? He loves attacking people. It makes him feel good, but it makes a lot of people feel good. So look, we have this political debate. There are two possible groups to blame for the troubles of non-college educated whites and the rest of us. You know, there's a truthful and rational explanation that the rich have been squeezing everybody else, making us all relatively poorer. That is one explanation of who is at fault, and it is completely true. And then there's the phony emotional explanation that it's the out group, the non-whites. Persuadable voters tend to hold these two ideas in their heads, both of them. They will believe either one of those. But who said that in the 2016 election? I mean, one side was said, and the other side wasn't. So the message is fairly simple. In order to blame the rich, you know, for typical working Americans, the economy is a wreck. There was a problem when President Obama would defend the economy as he should. I mean, it's the president. The economy was objectively getting better all along. He inherited the biggest mess since the Depression. It was caused by the conservatives. So, I mean, everything he said was rational, logical, and so forth. But people didn't feel like the economy was getting better. People still felt like they were in a recession. People still feel that the economy is a wreck, and for them it is. So you got to agree with them. You got to start an agreement. To fix it, our policies must benefit all the people, not just the richest 1%. It's absolutely essential to blame the rich. You don't have to say 1%. You don't have to say the rich. There's any number of ways to say this. But you have to give them a villain to blame. You might as well give them the truthful one. And then this last sentence, our system works when everyone gets a fair shot, everyone gives their fair share, and everyone plays by the same rules. This is something that President Obama used to say. It's terrific. People should say that. It's a great statement of values. And this is the solution because persuadable voters absolutely believe. This is one of the stereotypes that conservatives favor the rich, and another stereotype is that progressives favor the poor. And so who is it? Which side favors them? That's the tug of war. We have to show that we not only favor the poor, which we unapologetically do, but we're the ones that are standing with the middle class, which we obviously are, because the conservatives are only helping the rich. That's virtually everything that Trump is proposing is for the rich and no one else. So I'm going to stop again and see if anybody wants to react to my emotional statements about the economy, which are based upon actual polling and, you know, real psychology.
So once again, if people have any questions, you can type questions in the question bar or raise your hand if you have audio capabilities. I mean, the thing I like, Bernie, about the things that you phrase is, I mean, it takes these and kind of like our economic policy, our economic solutions, and converts the way we talk about them in a way that effectively hits a persuadable voter in their gut, or I mean, at least at an empathetic, I mean, in their heart, I mean, at an emotional level. And I think this is a key component, as you've laid out this entire presentation, that's missing in the overall progressive narrative to effectively engage, but more importantly, win over support for these ideas, and hopefully, again, long term, the political and in support for the political leaders that are talking this way and aligning with the values that is captured in the thing that you're talking about.
Yeah, Dave and I gave this same workshop live 3 times in a row in Ohio last Saturday. And there were some people that were uncomfortable with specifying the rich, because, hey, they're good people who are rich. And they were looking for a language that they're more comfortable with, the greedy rich or something. And that's fine. You need to use language that you are comfortable with. We're never suggesting that you memorize our language and say it, because it's not going to be authentic coming from you. We're just giving examples. But I think that we convince people pretty well that they need to make this point, whichever way they feel comfortable making it, they need to make this point. Why don't I add something? There was this Hart Research poll that asked people a choice between a Republican who will grow the economy and a Democrat who will make the economy work for all of us, right? Our positive statement. And those voters chose the Republican 55 to 45. But when given the choice between a Republican who will grow the economy and a Democrat who will, quote, make the economy work for all of us, not just the wealthy, that is, specifying the wealthy, they chose the Democrat 61 to 39, so that by explicitly indicting the wealthy, the Democrat gained 16 points. It's an essential part of this message, because people are looking for someone to blame, and they totally believe that conservatives and Republicans favor the rich. So you're just agreeing with a belief that's already in their heads.
We get a question here from Karen Lewis Young. If our message needs to be that the economy works better when it works for everyone, what are the strategies to achieve that?
Oh, well, we've got a lot of policies that are in the progressive agenda that would address that. I mean, one of the things that I don't think we do enough of is having more progressive tax policy. If we were to have legislation that, on the one hand, strips out special interest tax benefits or makes the taxes more higher on the rich, and simultaneously slightly cuts taxes or gives a slight benefit to everybody else, I think that would poll, 70 to 30 or 75-25 or maybe higher. It's just a very straightforward statement of what we stand for. Certainly the minimum wage and paid sick leave are things that fit that, and they poll very, very high. Certainly there is any number of ways of taking away special benefits from large corporations that, are getting subsidies or tax credits or special deals for any number of reasons. I think that if you took any state or locality and scoured the tax code, you'd find things that you could attack. Anything else, Dave? Must be a problem. I'm going to, in case Dave's not, are you there now, Dave?
Yes. I think we're good.
Yeah.
We're good. That's the last question.
Okay. All right.
So I
So,
think we covered all the questions. So I don't know if you want to close out.
all right. You know, I'm just gonna give half dozen examples, and I think that that's all we really need. Um, Talking about specific policies, how to use this. Um, you know, we just had one example of how to talk about the economy. Here's another way. It's a little more complicated, but you know, the economy's upside down. Majority of Americans are struggling, while the rich are doing better than ever. I use that because there's a poll where that was a very successful way of talking about it. We need an economy that works for Main Street, not Wall Street. Both of those phrases, Main Street and Wall Street, people get it. That works very well. People love mainstream. People hate Wall Street. It's like Washington. People hate Washington. Every hardworking American should have the opportunity to earn decent living, receive high quality. You know, all of this stuff is just standard progressive beliefs, and people want to hear us say it instead of just assuming that they understand that that's what we believe. Taxes. So I said, you know, tax system's unfair is a good way of doing it. Tax burden on working families has increased while rich people and large corporations pocket more and more tax giveaways, and that's wrong. Everybody believes that. I mean, that would poll about 80 to 15 or 85 to 10 in our favor. We need to change the rules to create a tax system that works for all of us, not just the wealthy few. Again, this not just the wealthy few works beautifully and is important to add when you're talking about anything economic. And this business of saying change the rules, people understand that a little bit better than changing the laws or regulations, although I'm not going to make a big deal of that. Just say whatever is, whatever feels good to you. Saying the rules is just a little trick that gains you a little bit. Budget cuts is another economic example. You know, again, you start out with in agreement. You know, we need to be careful with tax money and pinch every penny. You're not being a conservative when you say that. You progressives want to use the money for things that are actually going to help people, not waste money on inefficiencies, which there's plenty of things that are inefficient. And besides, people really think that tax money is wasted. I mean, they just do. And so you're totally in agreement there. But let's say that, you know, somebody's complaining about a conservative policy, or somebody's advocating for conservative policy. These budget cuts go too far. They hurt you, your family, your community. We need a budget that's fair to everyone, and whatever it is that that you're talking about. That'll support the progressive policy. If you're talking about health care, right now, you know, if you're talking about the Trump care, the secret plan that the Republicans in the Senate have, the thing that's important to talk about is that individuals are going to lose. You know, whoever you're talking to, at the moment, it appears that the Republicans are going to bring up something that's going to not only hurt people who have the Medicaid expansion, but it's going to hurt people who have insurance in any way possible, not just people on the exchange, but people who get their insurance through their employer. They're going to disrupt the entire market and ruin it for all of us. That's what this legislation is going to do. So you need to tell people you personally are going to get hurt, because they are. You know, it's going to deny coverage for essential medical care. That is, to be technical, they're going to lessen what the insurance has to cover. So people are going to get screwed when they need some kind of care and it's not among the things that's insured. It's going to jack up premiums for women and older Americans. That's part of the deal. and it's going to effectively deny anyone with a pre-existing condition. You know, they kept talking about pre-existing conditions, so they put in there that no, you can't be denied for a pre-existing condition, but for all intents and purposes, you can, because what the insurance company is allowed to do is to just jack up the rate so high that no one would ever buy it. So the insurance company would say, yeah, sure, you have asthma, you know, all you have to do is pay $2,000 a month. So for all intents and purposes, they are denying people with a pre-existing condition. It's just a little trick that the conservatives are trying to pull. So, you know, that's what we have to talk about, is how it affects everybody, because it is. It's going, only the rich people are going to be fine. This is another way of saying it. This introduction, you know, we need a healthcare system that provides the care you need when you need it at a price you can afford. That's something that Obama used to say. It's very effective. People totally are in agreement. And then you explain again that it puts the insurance companies in control, which everybody hates, and that they're going to screw us all, which is true. Crime, I already talked about this a little bit, but, you know, let's say that you're advocating for some kind of a diversion program for young offenders or nonviolent offenders or drug offenders or whatever. You know, you do it by saying it's the job of government to keep you safer, you, the person I'm talking to. And for, you know, those dangerous felons, lock them up. That's the way to make us safer. And we don't disagree with that. I mean, we disagree with 3 strikes, you're out and so forth. But I mean, when somebody deserves it, they deserve it. What our legislation is about is nonviolent young offenders and so forth. So you make the distinction and you say, look, for nonviolent young offenders, we need to do everything we can to divert them from a life of crime, right? And so our policy, by diverting them, is going to make the person you're talking to safer, more secure. And that's the truth. That's what appeals to them. That's what progressive policy does. Instead of talking about how it helps the offender or the criminal or the suspect, talk about how it helps all of us. Here's another example of that. There's standard legislation to require that all custodial interrogations are recorded, right? Should be done everywhere. Unfortunately, it isn't. You know, the whole point of this legislation is to protect you from crime, because you know, a lot of other jurisdictions get better evidence from suspects and witnesses by getting these recordings. It protects the innocent, and it makes it easier to convict the guilty. Technology has changed rapidly, and we should take advantage of it. The same thing can be said, you know, if you're talking about body cameras or any number of things. You're saying that even the thing that is primarily going to protect someone who's accused, indirectly it affects us. It protects us, because if the wrong person is accused and the wrong person is convicted, then the guilty party's still out there and may victimize us, right? So we want things that are going to correctly sort the guilty from the innocent, and that's what we favor. Obviously, immigrants is a big issue, and it's a big problem. But try starting with America as a nation of values founded on the idea that all of us are created equal, which everybody's going to agree with you there. And we need to be true to those values and protect everyone's right to due process and fair treatment under our Constitution. And I think everybody's with you there. Now, here's something that people actually agree with, and that is, for immigrants who they do not see as criminals, they're fine with them. Even if they are not authorized to be here, they're fine with them if they work hard and pay taxes and, you know, are not criminals. And that's why Trump continually and continuously talks about them as criminals, because if you talk about them as criminals, then people are against them. I mean, that is the dividing line in this debate, whether they're criminals or whether they're not criminals. So if we frame the people we're talking about as they've lived here for years, they work hard, they pay taxes, they play by the rules, then people are on our side like better than 80-20. And nobody wants to deport those people, if you put it that way. So it's a pretty strong argument, even though sometimes we feel like our back's against the wall. I'm just going to look at the time. I think I'll make this the last one. So education. So there's a number of things that are happening in education. You know, Betsy DeVos is going to attack the entire system of public education. We're going to feel it pretty soon. Most likely she's going to create these pots of money, gigantic pots of money, where if the school system does not do charters and vouchers, then they won't get the money. So she'll essentially bribe them into complying with her extreme right-wing philosophy. But there's also a problem with continuum problem with over-testing and you know, using unreasonable programs on especially children in poverty. What you want to talk about is people's own children, for our families and our communities to provide each and every child the opportunity to reach their fullest potential of life. You say that and they're going to be thinking of their own children, their grandchildren, you know, the children in their lives. That's what you want in their heads. And that's important because people like their local schools. Their dislike is a general thing based on what they read in the news. But what they actually know, when you bring them back to their own children, they're on your side. Recognize there are no standardized children. Every child has different strengths and weaknesses. This is an indirect pushback against standardized tests because there's no standardized children. And that our schools must have a complete curriculum provided by professional teachers who have the training to give the individualized attention each child needs, which is what a professional teacher is all about, to have discretion, to use judgment, and not make teachers act like trained monkeys, because that's wasting their professional knowledge. I think I'm going to stop there. I could do this on quite a number of issues, but if you get a copy of our book, which will be available online in about 2 weeks, certainly by 3 weeks, you can buy a copy of the book on Amazon in about 4 weeks. It will give you sample narratives on dozens and dozens and dozens of issues and how to answer different challenges. And I think you're going to really enjoy it, and it'll be useful to you.
Right. Bernie, we're getting some quite a bit of questions around, like, talking about minimum wage and like how to talk about it to balance the need of small businesses. And I'm wondering if it makes sense to dedicate a future session to that without. Yeah. It's literally, they're starting to roll through, and I'm like, whoa. So for those who are asking those questions, I'm going to put it in the queue to talk about those topics.
I think that's a good idea.
That topic is another dedicated session.
Just very quickly, is minimum wage is one of the most powerful issues that we can push. It works everywhere. Even if your state has already increased the minimum wage, you can increase it more. I mean, unless you're like in Seattle and you're already up to $15, it's just about the best thing we can do. The only real pushback that the other side has is by crying about small business, which of course they don't care about small business, but they know, based on polls, that that's the only real argument they have. And that's because people worship small business. People love small business. And when people think of small business, they're really thinking of, you know, the local cleaner that's owned by one family. You know, that's small business to them. And they want to protect small business, and you should say, absolutely, we're going to protect small business. But the fact is that the minimum wage generates spending in our local community. And those small businesses are going to get the benefit of it. It's going to stimulate the economy for them. This is going to be a win-win for both the employees and those small businesses. And incidentally, it's not the small businesses who are leading the fight against this. It's the rich and the wealthiest corporations. Anyway, Dave can talk sometime about the polling that he knows all about that shows that while this small business argument is the best one they have, it doesn't really move the numbers very much.
And the arguments for are so much more powerful. Agreed. All right, well, I don't think we have any additional questions. I think I want to bring people's attention in the next couple of weeks, a new edition of Voicing Our Values to be made available. And I mean, Bernie, if there's any other kind of closing remarks that you have.
Nah, I think, my best closing remark is in about 2-3 weeks, we're going to have 2 new books on our website that I think are going to be dynamite. And I think people are really going to enjoy them. And they're free. You just download it. Or if you want a hard copy, all you have to do is go to Amazon, buy one. And I think we're really trying to make things that are very user-friendly. And I think we've succeeded.
That's great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again. You can join us here usually about the same time every 2 weeks. Stay tuned for another Voicing Our Values message training, policy leadership training in the coming weeks. Be sure to check out our website at www.publicleadershipinstitute.org. Again, all of this research, all these materials, all these supporting tools, and reach out to us, email us, let us know how these things are working. What are you experiencing? Give us the feedback to make these tools more impactful and more effective. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to be with us, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you, everyone. And Bernie, thank you again as our communication experts for the progressive movement. Thank you so much for your leadership and your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.